Well, hello. Welcome again for another episode of Nomads at the Frontier. That's where Data Center Frontier and Nomad Futurist get together at industry events and talk about what the buzz and the zeitgeist is. So we're here today at Data Center World, and I'm here with Phillip Koblence, who is one half of the directorship of Nomad Futurist and Chief Operating Officer for NYI.
The worst half.
Yeah. So Phil, let's just dive right into the buzz and what you've been hearing here at Data Center World. Before I want to go into the weeds with you a bit with topics, but the one thing that I heard somebody say today that struck me was that it's like the vibe here is everything that the industry has been talking about for the last 3 years, but even more. It's all about power, but it's even more about power. It's it's workforce, but it's even more about workforce. And the other big takeaway is that I've heard several people say, it's unequivocally, there's no bubble. Nobody at Data Center World is talking about there being a bubble or worrying about there being a bubble. It's about how fast can we build, how fast can we get power. So I just want to bounce that off you and see how that...
You want to bounce the bubble off me?
Yeah,
I think usually the people inside the bubble don't talk about the bubble. Right. So it's the first rule of Fight Club is you don't talk about Fight Club. So look, there are certainly some elements of our industry that are overhyped. I don't think that would be unique to say. So I think there are bubblish qualities to it, but I think there's no doubt that the appetite for digital infrastructure continues to grow. And if you can measure that, I feel like we say this conference after conference, from PTC to DCD last month, and now here. If the measure of whether this industry's kind of staying power is by the representation and how many people are coming to these conferences, it is, we haven't even scratched the surface yet. It is just continuing to grow at this kind of exponential pace. And what I've been struck by in this conference in particular is two things. One, there's a lot more focus on the value and the need for community engagement. I mean, it's not just kind of a talking point that people are saying because they want it to be a checkbox. It's something that is at the top of everyone's mind as they see moratorium after moratorium going through various governments. I know we were talking about our excitement to see the governor of Alaska tomorrow.
Yeah,
going to be here to talk about that state's reaction to it. But you see it everywhere from Maine to Illinois, and even some areas of Virginia just trying to issue these moratoriums down to Arizona. So even these large, digital infrastructure hubs kind of trying to take a moment and pause. And in large part, that's a consequence of just communities that are not being given a seat at the table with this development. So I think it's an important takeaway here. The other thing that I was struck by, particularly in the keynote today, there was a gentleman that was at Microsoft that moved to NVIDIA that was speaking with Bill on the panel. That was really talking about the value associated with power storage, how that should be a focus, not just on getting power and understanding that you need to be part of the grid, but trying to figure out ways to mitigate the kind of dynamism of the workloads. And I think the more we get kind of mature with these workloads, the more a lot of these issues that were theoretical start to bubble up to the surface, and we're kind of having to solve them in real time. And I think it's just fascinating to see it happen, kind of live and in person.
Absolutely. Well, to go to your 2 points on the community thing, I mean, yes, and all week people have been talking about the people who are outside on the curb, and the discrepancy couldn't be any larger because, we all follow the mainstream news. We all know what they think the story of data centers and the data center industry is. Then you come inside the conference and you hear about, I'm not sure if the people on the curb know just how much the people inside the building are thinking about them, are concerned about their viewpoint, but also feeling like these folks need to be educated because there's a tremendous amount of misinformation out there, and this has been a theme at the conference. There'll be erroneous facts that are cherry-picked, or a mainstream news story will come out quoting something about one data center, and this gets conflated, across the entire industry, and so having that communication and education and and doing it with kindness and understanding, I guess.
I mean, I think that's the delicate balance, right?
Yeah.
It's easy to go up to them and be like, "Oh, you organized this protest using, WhatsApp or you're
Facebook
using
and a QR
Facebook.
code.
You have a QR code on your, kind of data centers are evil thing for people to, like, share, and subscribe." But ultimately, it's really just about, giving voice to the legitimate concerns that they have, making sure that people have a seat at the table and ultimately a stake in the outcome. And I think we as a data center industry have always been fairly insular because nobody really knew we existed while they were using the internet, and now it's growing at such a hyper fast pace. It's seemingly, certainly to the general population that's outside of the bubble that is this industry, at least from the standpoint of the kind of insular group, coming out of nowhere. And it hasn't really come out of nowhere because a lot of these things are concerns that we have had and we've had to kind of face that are finally making it into the mainstream. And the easiest possible thing to say is no. Like anytime you have like a disruption to the way things are, a disruption to the way metrics are used to measure economic benefit to a particular community, you're going to have people that say, no, I don't want that. And I think if you look at like the Industrial Revolution timelines, there were times that factories were, a welcome addition to a town and the focus of the economic benefit in that town. And now, instead of the factories that are manufacturing things, which is just simply not the society that we live in today, you're talking about AI factories, and the amount of productivity that's coming out of these data centers has fundamental economic benefits that result in increases in workforce, increases in job opportunities, increase in tax basis, just not in the same way that they were in the 60s, 70s, and 80s.
Absolutely. Well, you just said the magic word, which was AI, in conjunction
Do we have to drink? Do we have
with
to drink now?
factory. Later, they will be drinking it.
Every time you hear AI on Data Center Frontier, drink.
Yeah, but in that context, what a lot of people are talking about at this conference, it's not surprising because at GTC in March, Jensen Huang, pretty much declared that we're in the inference inflection point. But that wasn't just talk; that's actually happening, And I've been talking to people here saying, are you planning for it? Are you building for it? Are you starting to do it? And they're telling me that they are, starting to do it, and also along with that, with the inference uptick, is people are taking. It seems to me taking a harder look at what's going on in enterprise data centers because inference is going to rely on the enterprise, and also interconnection. So I know that in your work at NYI, you're concerned about both things there. So I had to ask about it.
Yeah, look, I think inevitably the way the cyclical nature of our industry has always been there's been kind of aggregation of workloads, disaggregation of workloads. The cloud was going to displace the data center, and then ultimately you had data sovereignty, and you had the need for consistently used resources where you had a bunch of cloud repatriation, and you're seeing the same thing with AI workloads. The hype cycle has been about these kind of large language models, and now as we start leveraging those large language models for actual logistically feasible use cases that businesses are going to use in their everyday operations, where data is being generated at the edge, on our fingers, on our watches, with all of the, kind of autonomous vehicles and all of the, IoT things that people talk about, that data needs to be manipulated and inferenced at the edge. So there's going to be a big swing back to these highly interconnected kind of tier one NFL cities, if you were, where population centers are, where the data is going to have to leverage the large language models and be manipulated in real time, because those applications ultimately have kind of a latency element to them. So, you're going to see this renewed interest in what type of deployments make sense in major cities where you have some logistical hurdles that you may not have had in these kind of AI factories in large swaths of kind of farmland or former crypto mining operations, where you have, logistical issues associated with, legacy infrastructure, legacy buildings. You have some of these historic buildings in New York City at 60 Hudson Street, which is the most interconnected building, I say, on the planet, but certainly in New York City. That building was built in the 20s for Western Union. That's not changing anytime soon. So inevitably, the floor loads are what they are, and the floor to ceiling heights are what they are. You can manipulate some of those things, but ultimately you're not going to find really 150 kW deployments that you can put in major cities. So you have to start looking at, the processing realities of inference versus the parallel processing realities of these large language models, and kind of build to your use case. But to that point, it's not a ubiquitous environment. There is no one type of data center. It is a large spectrum of kind of application and workloads.
Totally. Great word for it, spectrum. And yes, that is another trend here that we're tracking, is there seems to be a stratification, in the market, in the types of data centers. We're talking all about AI, but Phil Lawson-Shanks just made the point on a panel upstairs that, the cloud is still growing, and is in fact what everybody uses, what everything relies on, and that's also growing. Okay, let's bring it back around to Nomad Futurist and workforce and education, because you can't really separate that from the community part. And as the standard bearer here today for Nomad Futurist, I mean, what kind of conversations are you having? Have you been talking with young people? Have you been talking with older people who are looking to, we had a podcast on Data Center Frontier where Dennis Cronin was talking about the talent cliff, and his point was, we're not approaching it, we're over it. There is just a straight up lack of electricians, engineers, that are going to be required. So, how is that factoring into what you're hearing?
Yeah, look, I think, first of all, I have no age requirement for having conversations. So I've had conversations with young and old. Yep. On the young side, I mean, thankfully, as we've tried to do with all of these conference organizers, we have a workforce development day in partnership with Infrastructure Nations and I Am Armed Forces tomorrow. That's going to be kind of a 9-to-1 day. Yep. They were nice enough to allow us, kind of to get free access to a bunch of these folks that are interested in learning about digital infrastructure as a potential career path. Tremendous. And really start just kind of removing that veil of secrecy that our industry has been hidden behind. But one of the Phil Lawson-Shanks data points that he mentioned that he always brings up is for every 2 people or for every 3 people that leave the industry, we only have 1 coming in. And I think part of that is the inevitability of just the education system not keeping pace with the evolution of digital infrastructure as a career path. If you ask people at their kitchen tables what they want to do for a living when they're younger, they'll still say doctor, lawyer, firefighter, finance, and whatever doesn't get them beaten by their parents. At least that's how it was in my case. And a lot of that is there's a long-term shift that's going to have to take place, and we're trying to accelerate that, but to a certain extent we're trying to boil the ocean also, while we're also at this kind of evolutionary moment of kind of compute and the disruptive nature associated with AI. So what we're trying to share with young people, old people, and people that are like trying to figure out if they have a place in our industry, is to make it clear that everyone has a place in our industry. There is no vertical, there is no job that does not have a place within not just digital infrastructure. If you go onto the exhibit floor in this conference, every element of everything within the data center has a full kind of sub-vertical industry associated with it. Totally. Every fastener has a set of, from SG&A all the way through engineers, mechanics, logistics, project managers, product managers, et cetera. Yeah. And there's just the idea that there's going to be displacement of the workforce is likely to be the case, as it's been the case through every kind of phase of the Industrial Revolution. But ultimately, it's only going to increase the opportunities, for us to be productive as a society.
Great point about the expo hall. I mean, Sherwin-Williams has a booth in there, and they are jamming. Because the data centers, if you're going to have, steel outside in the elements, you need a kind of paint that can last for, the length of your data center, which could be 20 years in some cases. And then Bill Clayman pointed out in his keynote this morning that there is a catering company in there with a booth who does catering just for data centers. I mean, I've never actually, I've been to a few trade shows. I mean, that expo hall in there is amazing.
It is. It's crazy. And we used to talk about only first it was a surprise that transformers and interconnection solutions were at the same location. Now you have beyond the catering, you have actual temporary housing for construction workers being represented on that hall. So it is just it runs the full gamut, and I think people would be surprised how large of an ecosystem is involved in creating the kind of digital economy that exists today.
Yeah, well, we'll leave it there. I think this series that we're doing is supposed to be a shorter type of drive-by podcast, and I think
I don't know why you're still talking.
I know, but I think we completed the assignment. So
KPI met.
Yes, indeed. So, and just think there's, it's only Wednesday afternoon. We've got all of tonight to go here at Data Center World. So, thanks, Phil. Always great to catch up with you and talk about the data center industry and Nomad Futurists. So thanks again.
Thank you, Matt.